ASTC On Air, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time, this is our opportunity to bring to our members fresh views of international experts on very big issues, and we have the chance to speak with Owen Gaffney, who is a climate change communicator for so long, but much larger than climate change, I would say. And he will be with us in Paris next week, joining us for the Science Center event at the COP21 climate negotiations. So we're very happy to start the process of our Parisian events with asking him a number of questions of what this all is going to mean. And so, Owen, thanks for being with us today. I know you are in Stockholm right now, where you live, and you told me your house is in the middle of the forest and you're back to work every day, which is, I think, the dream of every of us. But tell us a little bit more about you. How do you end up being so much involved in this communication about these big issues?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, so I'm director of international media and strategy for the Stockholm Resilience Center. Which is I guess one of the world's leading centers on resilience thinking. And I'm also director of communications for Future Earth, which is the new international research program focusing on global sustainability. And in fact, I've just come back from Japan, where we've been at a Future Earth meeting for the last 10 days, looking at the research strategy, how the research communities can come together, the natural scientists, the social scientists, and engineers, everybody involved in this challenge to find a sustainable planet, how we can build a united research agenda around that. But how did I get into this whole thing? So yeah, so I guess I sometimes feel like, you know, in war zones you have these journalists that are thrown into they're called like embedded journalists or something. You're sort of embedded in a specific military unit, and you're with that unit for 6 weeks or several months or whatever, and you get full immersion in the whole experience. I feel like I'm a bit like that for Earth system science. I've been sort of immersed in this area. I've been coming from journalism and then immersed in this scientific area for the last decade, really. It's been an incredible journey for me. So my background, you know, I'd worked for many years in the media, in filmmaking and film production in the UK, and in journalism, and then I retrained particularly as a science writer, and I've been focusing on sort of journalism, I guess, science writing specifically for 10 years, first in the UK and now out in Stockholm. But my real background was way back was in astronautic engineering, so spacecraft and satellite design, and I guess that was a kind of a draw originally for bringing me into the climate change arena, where you know, organizations and institutions wanted to bring in climate communicators who had at least some sort of technical understanding or knowledge of sort of Earth systems thinking, which I'd had that from my engineering background, I suppose. So it's fairly natural. And if I hadn't become an astronautic engineer, I would have become an anthropologist. That was my other job possibility. So now the two have very much merged in the kind of work we do on global sustainability, where we try to bring the big sort of global environmental issues and try to understand them in that sort of socio-economic context, and you know, bring the data together on these issues, bring the scientists together on these issues, bring the social scientists and natural scientists and beyond together. So that's a bit of a brief background on.
Very good, and that's just the best resume of why you are here, because this is exactly the kind of expertise that we are looking for to speak to our members. But those who were with us in Rio a couple of years ago in 2012, they may remember that ASTC at that point, with the other networks, had organized a partnership through you with the famous Planet Under Pressure conference, which was the science conference that was preparing the Rio Summit. And I think for the first time, there was a very big link between what science centers were doing in their daily practice at the occasion of a meeting, of a scientific meeting like that, and we established a lot of direct connections between the two. So how did you experience that?
Yeah, I mean, so the Planet Under Pressure conference, it was held 3 months before Rio +20 summit, and that was very deliberate timing, and it was the official scientific conference in advance of the summit, recognized by the United Nations. In fact, Ban Ki-moon gave a video address to the conference, and it's some conferences come and go and aren't remembered. I guess the Planet Under Pressure conference just comes up time and time again. It has an incredible legacy. What it was trying to do, trying to put the science on the table on planetary stewardship and planetary boundaries, and this idea of the Anthropocene, which I'm sure we're going to discuss later, and get that on the table of the Rio +20 summit, and thinking about this new responsibility we have for the planet. And it was also talking about solutions. It was talking about the pressure the planet was under and the solutions. And it was 3,000 scientists. There's never been a global sustainability conference like that, bringing together so many scientists from both natural science and social science. So in that way, it was historic. I mean, I was at a United Nations meeting back in September, back in June in New York, on the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Planet Under Pressure conference was mentioned there as an exemplar that we need another Planet Under Pressure conference now. They were saying now the Sustainable Development Goals have been agreed. And again, we're hearing that sort of time and time again. The Global Environmental Facility is a big international organization, talks about Planet Under Pressure as
what was the results of Planet Under Pressure seen in Rio? Were you in Rio then after that, where the big negotiations took place? Is there any of what you was discussed in London being transferred in a way or another to the Rio Summit itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, very, very basically, the data visualization, a short 3-minute film we produced for Planet Under Pressure, called Welcome to the Anthropocene. It opened the Rio +20 summit. So it was introduced by Ban Ki-moon and shown to over 100 world leaders there. I mean, that was one specific impact, and then we had many of our scientists there. The International Council for Science had they were running a science conference alongside Rio +20 with a lot of feed in from the Rio +20 summit. From the Planet Under Pressure conference, and so that was really good in terms of the outcomes. I mean, we supported the Sustainable Development Goals. We supported the need for Ban Ki-moon to appoint a chief scientific advisor. In fact, we proposed that, and then he announced later then that he would create a scientific advisory team, this scientific advisory board. I mean, those are two key things that have come out of it, and then much closer links between the United Nations and the various agencies and the research community. I mean, it's been a complete new thinking, a new way that science is engaging with policy, and I think Planet Under Pressure was certainly a signal that we needed to change, and the research community was ready to make that change.
And I agree with you that one of the significance of the Planet Under Pressure, I think, is to show to the world that there is possibility to base decisions on evidence, and that you have been pushing for that. And the fact that a lot of scientists being together on that scale, saying, it's time to take into account the results of what the science says, was a very important part of it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other important part of it was, I think, the relationship that we had with the Association of Science and Technology Centers, with you guys, which, I mean, this was an absolute remarkable achievement. I mean, it surpassed our expectations, because what we did was, because we spoke to you about the Planet Under Pressure conference. I can't remember who reached out to who, whether you reached out to us or we reached out to you, but there was a sort of meeting of minds, and this idea then that how could we mobilize the science and technology centers and get them to run, ask them to develop events, workshops, public events, do something in public spaces on the Planet Under Pressure theme. And by the end of it, we were talking just before this call that there was, I was trying to remember the exact numbers, but there was 250 events worldwide. It was incredible, from North America, from the US, from Canada, through Guatemala, Mexico, to India, China, Indonesia. It's I just remember many in Africa, and we had stuff going on in Israel, and I mean every continent was covered. It was an incredible achievement, actually. I don't think I can't recall anything happening like that before. So and it created so much momentum, sort of social media momentum and energy in the conference itself. And from then we had 3,000 people in the conference, but we had another 3,000 people watching live. Which was spectacular, I think.
Yeah, we hope that next week in Paris we can, do something similar with the initiatives at the occasion of COP21. So building further on the planet under pressure, I think what is also come out of that is that the notion of what you have been developing and with the Resilience Institute now is this notion of there is a limit to the planet and how we use it. And so can you tell us a little bit about what the limits of the planet are in terms of environmental issues and climate change?
Yeah, sure. So and the background to this is back in 2009 a group of scientists, about 24 scientists, published a research paper, A Safe Operating Space for Humanity, in Nature, and this gained a lot of attention. I mean, it was the media picked it up, the civil society, businesses, policymakers picked it up. The scientific community have spent the last 5 or 6 years deeply analysing this. And basically, the idea with the Planetary Boundaries paper, why it was such a landmark paper, really, was that it suggested that when we look about this huge complexity of the planet, how it functions, it seems way too complex to understand or to meaningfully communicate. But we're obviously pushing the planet way beyond sort of natural boundaries. So the researchers were looking at well, what are the key parameters that keep within the current stable state of the planet? Now, we've been in a stable state for about 11,000 years. Since the end of the last ice age, it's been a remarkably stable state. Geologists call it the Holocene. Now, the International Geosphere Biosphere Program, my previous organization, published some groundbreaking research showing how far we're going beyond Holocene boundaries. So this Planetary Boundaries work was really looking at, well, if we are pushing beyond these Holocene boundaries, how far can we push before we start tipping Earth into a new state that might be deleterious to human development? A new state where the weather patterns become very unpredictable, where droughts will become more common, where the stability of the ice sheets are in jeopardy, where we start seeing huge die-off, mass. Well, we see ecosystems will be changing irrecoverably, and then they identified nine planetary boundaries which we should remain within to keep this stable state. And they also assessed that we'd passed 3 of those boundaries relating to climate change, biodiversity loss, and biogeochemical cycles, or phosphorus and nitrogen use, the fertilizers we use. And so so then this research generated huge attention. It's a huge analysis has gone on in the last few years to assess and verify it. And then in January this year, we published an updated version of the Planetary Boundaries paper in the journal Science, on the same day that we published a paper on the great acceleration in human activity. And then this time we assessed that we'd actually crossed 4 boundaries, a 4th boundary relating to deforestation. So after all this time, there's still the idea that there were 9 boundaries was still solid, that was a sound analysis, and then all the boundaries were fine-tuned and better estimates put in place as to where those boundaries lie. So going beyond a boundary means that it doesn't mean that we've hit a tipping point and things are going to change rapidly. What it does mean, though, is that we are heading in the dark. We don't know where the tipping points in the Earth system are, and we could be crossing them at any point, and we know they're lurking there, they're close by. So we're taking sort of more and more risks with the stability of the Earth system the longer we're beyond these boundaries. So then the key thing is really to...
You know, a less catastrophic view than, you know, we are destroying the whole thing. We say that there are a number of limits that we have not reached, and so there is still some space for improvement and for resilience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, and I'm going to see if I can get up a image here of the boundaries for you. That's loading up on my page right now. Yeah, so
so while you are looking for that, that is one of the outcomes of Planet Under Pressure is what you mentioned. Also, is the Future Earth program. At some point, you may. Oh, here we go. Please, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So here we see that the 9 boundaries. We have climate change, novel entities, and stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric aerosol loading as small particles, ocean acidification, biogeochemical cycles, phosphorus and nitrogen, freshwater use, land systems change, and biosphere integrity. I think this is on this is on the Anthropocene.info website. We developed this website. This was launched at Planet Under Pressure as well, the first website on the Anthropocene, and we've just been updating that recently. So you can see over there, if you go on there, you'll see that this is scrolling through from 1800 through to the present period, and how we've gone beyond these boundaries, moved out of the safe operating space in certain key areas, and need to move back in as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the word Anthropocene, and I know that it's becoming more and more known. But can you maybe just give it the most recent definition of that, and how much it is accepted right now?
Yeah, okay, and that's a great question. So the idea of the Anthropocene really came out of a meeting in Mexico in 2000, International Geosphere Biosphere meeting, and it was I wasn't there, but there's our research community were there, and they were showing. I was just about to get this thing up again. Maybe I won't. Talking about the changes in the late Holocene, and there was a lot of talk about this late Holocene and how much we'd been changing atmospheric composition, the oceans, the land in this late Holocene, the biodiversity in this late Holocene, until the Nobel laureate Paul Crutzen, the Dutch chemist who got the Nobel Prize for his discovery of how chemicals could destroy the ozone layer. He made a remarkable intervention during this. He said at one point, "Hold on, we're no longer in the late Holocene. We're in the," and he couldn't find the right word for it. And eventually, he said the Anthropocene, and then the room ignited, and this was the conversation in the coffee, if a coffee break later that day was just talking about this idea of the Anthropocene. So Paul Crutzen published an article on it, first with Eugene Sturmer in a newsletter, an IGBP newsletter, and then in Nature, talking about this concept of the Anthropocene. And over the last then 15 years, this has gained a lot of debate in the research community talking about it. And basically, the idea is that if the geologists split the time periods on this planet, you know, the planet is 4.5 billion years old, into various time periods, and each time period is marked by some major shift, some major change in the Earth system, like the Jurassic time of the dinosaurs, and the KT boundary when the meteorite hit Earth and killed the dinosaurs, or the ice ages, coming out of an ice age and into an interglacial. We hit the Holocene. So the idea that actually humanity has now pushed Earth into a new geological epoch is quite profound. I think as a scientific concept, it's up there with Copernicus's idea that the Earth revolves around the sun, or Darwin's idea of natural selection. We have to rethink our place in the world. Those two ideas have forced us to rethink our place in the world and how we see the world. And the Anthropocene will shift worldviews in the same way. We have to move away from thinking that that the planet is some sort of endless horizon, that we can have a frontiers mentality, and B, that we are at the mercy of nature. In fact, we are the prime driver of change on the planet. So it's got a lot of. So the geologists and earth system scientists have been debating it and debating when it possibly could have started, and now a lot of humanities and social scientists are debating it, discussing it, incorporating it in their work. And you're also seeing artists, musicians, others taking up the concept and exploring it as a concept within their work. So I mean, and where do we stand with it? So the International Commission on Stratigraphy are the body that decides on geological time, and they take their time about things. They don't make decisions lightly. They have formed an Anthropocene working group to look at this idea seriously, and the Anthropocene working group has met several times and published a few papers now looking at the concept. And they are meeting in April 2016 in Oslo, and I think that might be the last meeting. They will make a decision or a proposal, a recommendation to the International Commission on Stratigraphy next year on whether or not they think that we are in the Anthropocene, and if we are, then when the Anthropocene started. And it looks likely that they will be making a proposal that we are in the Anthropocene, and it looks likely that they will propose that the Anthropocene began possibly quite precisely on the 16th of July 1945, when the Trinity nuclear explosion in the Arizona desert, which because that's a specific point. That's like a golden spike in the geological record. Because of those explosions, the nuclear tests in the atmosphere, we've got radioactive carbon laid down in the sedimentary record, which will be an unmistakable sign millions of years from now. So what's going to happen in April next year in Oslo is going to be groundbreaking. It's going to be an incredible moment in history, I think.
For all of us that are living right now and knowing that this transition period is something quite exciting, even though it means that we are impacting our planet in not necessarily the most positive way all the time.
I suppose. Well, that's a good point. And that's why I like the idea of the Anthropocene as a concept, in that it's reasonably neutral. In that, while of course we're impacting the planet in this profound way, moving into the Anthropocene has also been very good for many, certainly for the 1 billion in the developed world. We've been able to eradicate many diseases. We live longer, healthier lives. We have a lot more stability, less war than before. So while we have to balance that out with the environmental impact, it as a concept, I think, is reasonably neutral.
So, looking at having the time in mind, so looking forward to the COP meeting next week in Paris now, having said all that and knowing that there are boundaries to our planet and that we are impacting the planet in many ways, and that climate change is one of these things. So what are the biggest challenges for next week in Paris for the climate meeting?
Yeah, so this is going to be historic. This is the 21st time nations have met to try to hammer out a deal on climate change. So the world is watching. The events in Paris in the last week as well, the terrorist attacks, are going to undoubtedly have an impact on the negotiations and on the mood in Paris, I think. and it's a lot of, we're doing a lot of thinking about that, about security. So but it's going to be it's going to be momentous. I mean, things have changed dramatically since 2009. The last time we had an event quite like this in Copenhagen, the COP15 climate negotiations, and COP stands for the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that meeting in 2009, there was so much attention, there was so many hopes for an agreement, and it failed miserably. But the way it was structured was very much creating a top-down. The world must create a binding agreement, and we'll put the framework in place to force countries to do that, and then countries couldn't really responded badly to that. This top-down push isn't always successful at international processes. So there's been a complete rethink of how to negotiate and how to bring about change for this COP21, and it's completely bottom up. So nations have been asked to submit their pledges, and what carbon emissions they're going to pledge to, and that's on the table for negotiating. And I think this means that we are going to get a successful agreement, I think, from COP21, because at the very least, we will get an agreement, because we have a minimum base to come from. And at the moment, the pledges that are in these contributions from nations, they don't add up to 2 degrees. Ideally we want 2 degree to meet the 2 degree target, 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and so the emissions coming in, and we're getting them week by week by nations. They're going above the 2 degree boundary, and we're actually at about 2.7 degrees is sort of the best estimate. So the research community says 2 degrees is potentially safe. 1.5 degrees is safer. 2 degrees has considerable risk with it. But and now we're going to we might stabilize at 2.7 degrees, given the pledges. And there's a huge amount of uncertainty here. I mean, the Earth system is so complex that that will it respond in this way if we stop the emissions and at 2.7 degrees? Will the temperature stop, or will it keep changing? I mean, these are the risks we're taking going beyond 2 degrees, and so.
Communicate to the public about that is that even last week, for example, there was a study published about the melting of the glaciers and the poles, that it will go as far as raise the level of the oceans, but it will take a longer time than we thought it was going to take. So yeah, there is always, like, science says, well, we think it is, and this is the framework in which we see it, but there are still a number of things we don't know. It's very complicated to communicate such a scientific finding to a large audience and say, well, you have to do something because, otherwise this or that is going to happen. So how complex is that for someone like you in your job to communicate this difficult science and make sure that people act upon it?
Yeah, okay. There's 2 things here. First, the whole world is watching climate change research unfold as at the cutting edge, and you're seeing new research all the time on stability of ice sheets and ocean circulations and the atmosphere. And but there's a huge amount. There's now centuries of established facts about climate change, and in fact, we've developed an app which we're going to launch in a few days' time, which will allow people to become climate experts. We think we could make people climate experts in less than a minute. So we're using some new cognitive technology to allow people to take in far more information far faster than ever before. And we think we can. So instead of studying for like a decade to become a climate researcher, we think about a minute. You'll have enough information to be able to talk about it with like an expert. So basically, and the idea is that in fact there's so many well-established facts about climate change, about carbon dioxide, about greenhouse gases, about human emissions, the scale of human emissions, about deforestation, about who's emitting how much, when, and where this carbon is going, and the potential impacts that we're going to see in the next decade and centuries and beyond. I mean, most of these facts have been established at least 100 years ago. So we're launching this app and giving people these established facts to discuss and to become experts, and we'll even there's a quiz at the end of the app as well to test them on their knowledge of it. I should I mean there's that side of it, and then we've got the cutting edge research happening all the time, where we're just finding out more and more and more about uncertainties about the stability of the ice sheets. And this, what you're talking about, the ice sheets, we're learning almost every week about the stability of Greenland and Antarctica. We published some research in July showing that if Earth goes around 1 degree centigrade above pre-industrial, what's that, 1.8 Fahrenheit? If we're already about 1. So this research said, yeah, at about 1, the global sea levels will eventually stabilize at around 6 meters higher than today. So even the temperature we've already committed to is looking likely to commit us to a sea level of 6 meters eventually, at least, of sea level rise. And most people would say, 6 meter sea level rise is disastrous. I mean, that's going to be extremely difficult to adapt to.
We're already at the last question here because our time is up. But so after the COP21 then, and you expect a good result, and then you have this app that allows the public to even understand it in 1 minute. So how do you see the role of the scientific community after COP21, and how can that relate to what the science centers potentially should do?
Okay, well, very, very briefly then, we held a major science conference in July this year, probably the next biggest conference since Planet Under Pressure, where we brought 2,000 scientists to Paris, focusing on solutions, and half the abstracts, half the talks there were focusing on solutions. The research community is now definitely moving from looking at the problem space, which still needs a lot of attention, towards the solution space. There's a huge effort to find solutions in terms of adaptation and in terms of decarbonizing the global economy. And now we're even talking to the Swedish government about being fossil fuel free by 2030. So we think Sweden could be free from fossil fuels within 15 years, which seems incredible, but more and more cities are moving that way, and I think we can expect more countries to announce they'll be fossil fuel free within 15-20 years, and more businesses. So I mean, the tide is turning. I mean, we've reached a tipping point in the socioeconomics of climate change. It's now economically viable to have a fossil fuel free economy and to move to renewables, and the science is going to really focus on that to rapidly transform societies. That's what needs to happen. In terms of science and technology centers, I mean, I'm already working with 2 or 3 on Anthropocene type exhibitions, on virtual reality experiences, we're looking at virtual reality, we're looking at augmented reality, and how do we give people this Anthropocene view? How do we sort of explore how people can experience the Anthropocene, and how our actions can operate at a global scale, how individual action multiplied up to 7 billion means a change in our biosphere. So we're looking, I mean, I think virtual reality and augmented reality are 2 of the biggest potentials for communicating. I mean, these are like empathy machines. You can really connect with an audience in a new way. So we're exploring new narratives with that, and we're working with various, I'm just back from Japan to the Miraken Science and Technology Center there, where we've been discussing the idea of doing a big augmented reality project. So I'm really, really excited about some potentials. I would love to see science and technology centres take on the Anthropocene as a concept, as a kind of neutral concept to explore what it means to be alive today and the changes we're making to the biosphere, for sure. And to do that in virtual reality, augmented reality would be great. We're doing a hackathon at COP21 to it'll be maybe the official COP21 hackathon on the Anthropocene and virtual reality.
Well, thank you, Owen. And just to remind for people who are listening now that we will be in Paris next week. You will join us there as well with one of the events. And as you mentioned here, we are now, scientists are looking for the solutions, and that's what the young people that we bring to Paris have been doing as well. So I think we are in an exciting time. Thanks for sharing that with us, and hopefully we'll find other projects to work with science centers on the Anthropocene. Thank you so much. Bye.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Walter. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to speak to you again.
Okay, see you next week.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.